14th, 2024. Well, I want to get into the situation that's evolved here. I think at least in terms of the Syrian situation, it's interesting that the U.S. is trying to deal with this guy who we have a $10 million bounty on his head, but he's now apparently a new prospective leader in Syria. So that's a rather interesting situation to behold. And then we also have the situation where the U.S. is now trying to intercede between the Kurds and the Turkish-related forces to prevent the Kurds from being rolled over by the Turks. And remember that the Kurds have the prisons that are holding all the ISIS members that were captured sometime back when Trump went in and beat the ISIS. So, and Baghdadi died while not like a dog, but running from a dog. So, at any rate, but this was Baghdadi's number two, is now the person that at least the current administration is trying to deal with, and that'll be an interesting development to see how that all pans out. Meanwhile, the Russians are apparently withdrawing, at least from all the inland positions toward the coast, and I presume they may ultimately just completely withdraw from Syria. I think it's still up in the air how it's going to end up. I tend to think they probably will only completely withdraw from Syria, and whether a lot of the air assets probably could just go back to Russia for the war in Ukraine, and other people could maybe go into Africa or whatever, because they have interests down there as well. But so we'll see how that plays out. For the moment, I guess it's turned out fundamentally that the Iranian and friends plot, Hamas and Hezbollah, against Israel has totally backfired, because essentially what we ended up with here is that they expended so much of their capability and ended up having it destroyed by the Israeli response to their attack starting on the October the 7th of 2023, that effectively they were so weak that when the Turkish-backed, and maybe Turkish and American-backed, but it looks like it's more Turkish than American, as it turns out. After all, we wouldn't have to be having to intercede, I wouldn't think. But at any rate, this group that took over, essentially, they didn't have the resources left to do anything about it. And most of the people I'm following seem to be saying that fundamentally the flaw was Assad himself was trying to get in good with the Arab League, and in process he was distancing himself from the Iranians and the Russians, which and as a result, there was little coordination. So it's a mixed situation. Plus, I think given the involvement Russia has in the Ukraine war, I think this was just an effort they didn't need to get involved in. It's also interesting to see where the Iranians are now, because remember, we're still awaiting that supposed Iranian response to the last Israeli attack, which hasn't come. Perhaps they've been deterred. But now there's discussion that Israel's going to go ahead and attack their nuclear facilities anyhow, regardless of what they do. So that's something to see how that plays out. By the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like. You can subscribe, and of course, click the bell for notifications on YouTube, or you can look below and see the address that you go to find me on Rumble. No, so that's kind of the situation we're in here on that. Now, in the Ukraine war itself, which is an interesting situation, right now it looks like the Russian offensive is continuing to progress. Certainly, the Ukrainians are putting up as strong a resistance as they can, but it looks as if that step by step they're getting encircled in various places and getting chewed up piece by piece. The North Koreans have finally entered the fray also in the Kursk region. And of course, we saw at a video where 25 of them were laid out, obviously KIA. It's unclear to me whether they were laid out by their own people, or were their position overrun with the Ukrainians and they laid them out. I don't know. That's an interesting question. But it does look like there's some successful incursions going on up there, as well as across several other places. So the battle is certainly raging pretty heavily. And one thing I think is interesting here, and it'll be very notable, is if we go ahead and look at, for instance, uh, the president-elect Trump has mentioned in his Newsweek article that, was quoting some numbers apparently he got from from the U.S. intelligence briefers, and has left him with the impression that the Russian casualties way outweigh what the Ukrainian casualties are, something like a 6-to-4 ratio. And of course, I think this is completely bogus, and it indicates to me that, in fact, Trump is being misled by these the deep state, if you want to call them briefers. And it'll be interesting to see whether he can see through this and see what's really going on there or not. If he goes into when he gets into office with the negotiations he's trying to arrange with Russia and Ukraine to end the conflict, he may be under a misperception of how willing Russia is to make a deal at this point. Because from what I can see, for the moment, the Russians are pretty much on the offensive and are pretty much winning. I mean, these little pinprick missile strikes we did with ATACMS and Storm Shadows really hasn't fundamentally blocked the Russian advance in any meaningful way at all. And although the going in this war is slow, it's a trench warfare concept. The fact of the matter is that overall the Russians have developed tactics where they can take ground and not take exorbitant casualties. They have a superiority in firepower with artillery and air power and logistics. And I just think that you'd be under a misperception if you think that the Russia is the one that's coming out on the losing end of this conflict right now. Not only that, but there's a lot of bombardment of the energy resources of Ukraine, the electric power, and so forth. As they go into the winter, Ukraine is going to find itself in pretty bad situation without adequate heating or maybe not enough electricity to operate their various systems, I guess. And so we'll see how that all pans out. But that's another aspect of this whole conflict is the wear and tear on the Ukrainian home front. So anyhow, that's the way I see it. But I would say though that hopefully that before they get into negotiations, Trump has a little bit better perception of what the real situation is in the conflict. Now, another development that's occurred, of course, has been that just occurred. That is the fall of the German government, which will lead to elections, I guess, something like in a couple of months. And so it's interesting to see how that comes out and whether or not a more pro-war German leader emerges or whether one that's more opposed to the conflict. I mean, recently, the election in Romania, someone who was actually against the conflict won the election, and then their high court overturned the election. So I don't know. I guess they'll have to have a new election. I don't know how that's going to play out. They blame the reason was supposed Russian interference and social media, that kind of thing, just like we hear over here. So it may well be true, but whether or not that's the reason the people voted that way or in any way made it unfair or not, that's another question. I mean, it seems to be kind of hard to, well, let's see how that plays out. But it's another example of that sort of situation. So at any rate, so that's kind of how I see the developments on the big international thing. I mean, at the moment, Israel is moving ahead and taking buffer zones in Syria, I guess to protect themselves against these terrorist groups that are going to be running the place. And I suspect we're going to find out that they're not as mild and as reformed as people seem to be thinking they are right now. We'll see. I mean, but at any rate, that's kind of about that. Now let's make a few comments. I'll get back into, we're continuing to follow the ongoing developments with the New Jersey and in fact other places, even Ohio and New York and so forth, of these drones or these alleged drones. And now it looks like the administration is trying to present the case that primarily these are misidentifications of aircraft and other objects. Although they also sometimes still say there's some kind of drones also involved, and I think it's kind of I don't know. I think the more people get involved in it, the more confused it's going to be. I would say this: that if it hadn't been for the use of drones and their commonplace in the modern world, if you were to go back a couple of decades or so when they weren't nearly so prevalent, my perception is that this would be all seen as a UFO flap, if you will. And we know that many times when those do occur, a lot of people get involved and tend to misidentify things and greatly run up the number of sightings. So we'll have to continue to keep an eye on this. I guess the biggest problem is that the government doesn't seem to know what to say, and that makes them look not that effective. On the other hand, Trump has just stated that the military does know what they are, and they ought to tell us. It'd be interesting. Does he know something we don't know about this? Well, if they really are UAPs, there probably is a part of the military that may know about it, but I don't think they're likely to be telling anytime soon. Anyway, so that'll be it for this time. I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and of course the address of my social media accounts will be in the description below. So all for this time.